From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The first departure of the second Trump administration. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power, with news today in Washington that Michael Waltz is out as President Trump's national security advisor. I'm Joe Mathieu, alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Thanks for joining, Kailey. This follows, of course, the whole Signalgate scandal, but remembering that President Trump at the time said Michael Waltz had done nothing wrong.
Yeah, even though he said he did take the blame for inadvertently adding a journalist to a group chat in which war or attack plans were discussed, he was standing by his man. But it seems that something has changed, and it's not just Michael Waltz who's going to be out, but his deputy, Alex Wong, as well, leaving a question as to who might be the replacement. Keeping in mind, this is not a cabinet-confirmed position. The president could very quickly appoint someone to step into Waltz's shoes, keeping in mind as well that I think the president in his first term had 6 either acting or official national security advisors. Turnover in this position is nothing new to Donald Trump.
For a critically important and sensitive job inside the White House, and it was, in fact, this very position that brought the first departure in the first Trump White House. Michael Flynn only lasted about 20 days. By the way, Anthony Scaramucci says Mike Waltz lasted 9.2 Scaramucci's.
Yeah, those are the math figures that are important to us here in Washington. But obviously, this has major implications, keeping in mind it comes just one day after the U.S., at long last, after what apparently were pretty incredibly lengthy negotiations, inked a minerals deal with Ukraine.
It wasn't Mike Waltz who drove that conversation. No. It was the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, making us all wonder about exactly where the lines are here of authority inside the White House and who could be on the short list now. Steve Witkoff's name keeps coming up, Kailey, but it could be a moment before we know.
And we'll get more into it this hour. But first, we have to check on the markets as well. And we do that, as always, with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
And indeed, good afternoon from New York. May Day and earnings day as well. Apple and Amazon earnings after the bell. Bloomberg Television and Radio are going to be all over these numbers as they break shortly after 4 o'clock Wall Street time. Stocks are higher. Tech stocks rallying ahead of those reports. Right now, we have got the S&P up 49, gain there of 0.9%. The Dow up 159, up 0.4%. NASDAQ up 322, a gain of 1.9%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.5%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up by about 0.5%. And the Bloomberg Mag 7 index ripping higher after earnings last night from both Meta and Microsoft. Right now, we have got our Mag 7 index up by 3.1%. 10-year 4.20% with a 2-year currently yielding 3.66%. Gold is down $69 the ounce, down 2.1%, $32.19 the ounce on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude, little change now, $58.30 a barrel. And Bitcoin up 2.7%, $97,122 on Bitcoin. GM has cut its full-year profit outlook, citing as much as $5 billion in exposure to auto tariffs. GM shares unchanged on the day right now. And Harley-Davidson has withdrawn its 2025 outlook, citing a lack of clarity around U.S. trade policy and weakening economic conditions. The company uses the ticker HOG, H-O-G. Right now, the stock is up by 3.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And back we go to Washington once again. Balance of Power continues. Your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. You can, of course, find Charlie checking the markets for us every day here on Bloomberg TV and radio on Balance of Power, just like you can always find us on this program at this time. And at this time yesterday, we were in the middle, or the White House was, President Trump was, of an elongated cabinet meeting. It lasted about 2 hours, in which he went around the table for every individual to speak that is in his closest orbit. And as of yesterday, that included Mike Waltz, the former Republican congressman from Florida who's been serving as the president's national security advisor. In that cabinet meeting, Waltz was praising the strength, in his words, of President Trump's leadership, talking about how honored he was to serve in that role. But it turns out, based on our reporting today and the reporting of other outlets, he will no longer be serving in that role going forward. He's stepping down as national security advisor, as is his deputy, Alex Wong.
You wonder if he knew at that moment what was going to be reported some 24 hours later. That's where we start our conversation and our coverage right now with Laura Davison, Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief. Before we get to our panel for analysis, we want to get to what we actually know here. Laura, Bloomberg has done a great job reporting on this so far. We should note that this is not an official announcement yet from the White House, correct?
Correct. This is coming from media outlets, including our own, who have confirmed that this is happening. But this is, a remarkable moment in that this is the first member of Trump's cabinet to leave. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles had been very adamant that she wanted to keep this initial team together. She didn't want to have infighting. She didn't want to sort of open the floodgates of Trump either firing people or having other people leave.
Well, and when we consider the kind of departure here, the vacancy that this fills, Laura, keeping in mind that Alex Wong left as well, do we have an understanding of who might be on the short list to replace Mike Waltz? Excuse me.
There's a handful of names being floated around, one being Steve Witkoff, who has sort of been at the forefront of, all these negotiations overseas going on with Iran, with Israel and Gaza, also with Ukraine and Russia. Kash Patel, the leader of the FBI, also has been in the mix, as well as Rick Grenell, who was sort of passed over for some of these higher level jobs in the initial wave of when Trump was picking his cabinet. He now is serving as an envoy, also as the head of the Kennedy Center. So he has a couple titles, but is someone who's also looking to move up in Trump's world.
There is a question, Laura, where there's one, could there be more? Now that we have seen the first departure, to your point, remembering that it was Michael Flynn in this same role who was the first departure in the first Trump administration, does this make it more likely that we could see others, a la Pete Hegseth, come under more pressure?
It is possible that we could see more departures now. There's sort of a feeling among Trump's aides that once he's gotten a little taste of firing someone, that there's more to come. Pete Hegseth is sort of the first person that people have turned to as a potential option here. There's sort of two schools of thought. One of that, with the firing of Waltz over this Signalgate issue, that the pressure is relieved on Hegseth. However, Hegseth, has fallen into more trouble with a second Signal chat involving his wife and brother. So he has certainly had the spotlight on him as someone who could be a short-lived Trump cabinet member.
Do we have an idea, Laura, of what other kind of outside influences, if you will, may factor into this decision making? Because we know, for example, Laura Loomer had expressed concern about a number of members of the National Security Council, those who had the ear of the president, who she suggested were not loyal. Is this kind of an extension of the thinking that exists in at least some wings of President Trump's party?
Yes, there's a sort of a thinking in the White House today that, Waltz's faults here and what led to his ouster were, partially his involvement in adding a journalist to the Signal chat, but also that his worldview didn't totally align with the president, that he wasn't totally sort of on the Make America Great Again, America First train, and was a little bit, more towards the center here. And that ultimately sort of created a wedge between him and other members of the cabinet.
All right, Laura Davison, who helps run our coverage here in Washington, is our Deputy Bureau Chief. Thank you so much for joining us on this developing story. And we want to get more now from our political panel joining us today. Ashley Davis is with us, Republican strategist and partner at S3 Group, alongside Adam Hodge, Managing Director at Bully Pulpit International and Democratic strategist. Both of them actually here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. This is fun, and it's good to see you guys. And we're all having a better day here together than I would imagine Mike Waltz is having today, Ashley. Arguably, the writing had been on the wall weeks ago. When Signalgate first emerged, it kind of seemed like he was going to be in the clear. So what would have needed to change here to have the president go from standing behind his man to no longer doing so?
Well, I'm not 100% believe that this is just about Signalgate. I think that this has many different dynamics to it. I think that Signalgate is a perfect way to say that that's what it's about. But I think that there were some other issues internally, from what I understand, just whether it is some of the policy differences, but also maybe some personality differences. But one of the things that was just said earlier that I think is very interesting that I think we should watch out for is Rick Grenell, because he wouldn't need to be Senate confirmed if there's anyone that thinks he's too controversial. He's very loyal to the president, has the national security background. So I don't think it's necessarily Witkoff, as everyone's saying right away. I think there are some others in the whatever, in the pipeline. Yes.
Adam, if you're Pete Hegseth, does this give you cause to worry now that the door has begun swinging, or does this actually give Pete Hegseth some cover because President Trump doesn't want to fire somebody else right now?
I think it maybe buys him another week or two, maybe a
You think the
little
defense
more than
secretary is gone in a week or two?
I mean, I think that the noise that has been created around the Signal controversy and the fact that he put his wife and his personal lawyer on that, it's just more drip, drip, drip that the president knows is just damaging to his broader reputation. And it is been a feature of his administration where there is just tremendous staff turnover. So I think it buys him some time, but I think he's got to be really nervous. And the turmoil that you've seen at the Pentagon, it is in chaos at the senior ranks, from everything I hear from folks who are there. And so that is a real, I think, problem for the president. And it also is a threat to our national security if there's chaos at the top of the Pentagon.
Well, I've seen a number of Democratic lawmakers coming out today and saying that they actually think the wrong head rolled here, that it wasn't Mike Waltz that needed to go, but that it was Pete Hegseth, for what we understand are more to what you were just alluding to, kind of violations, if you will, or questions around his use of Signal. So could this actually have the reverse effect of actually intensifying the pressure on Pete Hegseth, because everybody is saying, okay, but what about the other guy?
I mean, I think that Mike Waltz had a lot of, say what you want about his personal politics in Florida. Democrats felt like he was a serious person. He really could have a real conversation on national security issues. And there's no question that after he goes, there's a lot of questions who else fills the void? I mean, Rick Grinnell, to your point, Ashley, I mean, that gives a lot of people pause that he's not a real serious person to be leading our national security in the White House advising the president. So Steve Witkoff is someone who has maybe a little bit more confidence, but ultimately this ladders up to the president. And Democrats certainly feel that chaos has been a feature of all of his administration, including on the tariffs. Let's not forget.
Mike Waltz, quite a resume, right? A Green Beret, member of Congress. He was very close to the president, said to be loyal to Donald Trump. Washington's a funny place. Where does someone like that land? Does he have another job in Washington or in national security? What does he do?
It continues to, I'm going to wait and see how many more stories come out of maybe the real reason why that he was let go.
You're convinced it's not Signalgate?
I think it's one tool in the toolbox. Yeah. I don't think it's everything. Because if he's looked at as not having a relationship with the administration anymore in any way, obviously that's going to hurt him for the next 3.5 years. I don't know what he's going to do. He could write a book. He could go sit on some boards, but it's going to just be difficult, and it's going to be a tough time.
There is a Senate race in Florida and a governor's race in Florida in the next cycle. So
you want a primary Byron Donalds in the governor's race?
And if you want to take, I mean, you kind of need Trump to endorse you in Florida.
That's true, yeah. Maybe a tell-all.
Well, as happened with the man who literally just replaced Mike Waltz in the House of Representatives in a special election last month. When we consider, though, Ashley, the point that Adam was making about even some Democrats thought Mike Waltz was at the very least a serious hand here and brought credibility to national security issues. How do you think his departure might reshape the way in which this White House approaches issues of national security? Questions around Ukraine, for example, but the Middle East too.
I think that we need to see, number one, who he's going to be replaced with, and I'm assuming that you'll see a replacement pretty soon. I mean, this at least is a position that does not need to be Senate confirmed, which is much different. You probably have someone that's already been somewhat cleared in regards to the backgrounds and things that even go in the White House. So, and because it's such a serious position in regards to our national security, I think we see who it is by the end of this week, for sure.
Kailey, though, you touched on something at the beginning about the amount of turnover we've already seen and Laura Loomer's role in there. I mean, and it's not lost on me that along with Waltz, his deputy is also out.
Alex Long.
That really raises a lot of concerns.
I don't know if we're going to hear from Donald Trump on this today. It wouldn't surprise us if we did. They have tried to make transparency a hallmark here. Kailey and I spend most of our days with 2 shows to show for ourselves here, throwing to live events with Donald Trump. It was 2 hours worth the other night, an hour and a half yesterday. And I wonder your thoughts here.
Did you get out the popcorn?
Well, sometimes we do, actually. We're pretty good popcorn here in the Bureau. I guess I want to get to you both as professional communicators and the style in which we're seeing information disseminated. Because as you all know, you're on TV a lot and public speaking. You start talking in public for 3 hours a day, you're going to end up saying everything out loud at some point. We had an instance like that yesterday when the president was talking about tariffs and the prospect of empty shelves. Listen to what he said.
Somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. But we're not talking about something that we have to go out of our way. They have ships that are loaded up with stuff, much of which, not all of it, but much of which we don't need. And we have to make a fair deal.
That was a remarkable moment, and you're going to hear that played back a lot. Certainly, if we start having supply chain issues, prices increase. Actually, maybe the children will have $20 instead of $30. The ships are loaded up with stuff, much of it we don't need. If we have a problem around the holidays, and you're sitting in the communications office, how do you contain this?
I'm sure that there's lots of cringing that was going around in that room, because obviously it's something that he shouldn't have said. I do remember, though, the first term when he was doing tariffs, that Christmas was going to be canceled, or Halloween, I think it was going to be canceled then too, and it wasn't. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
But obviously, it's not something he wants to say. But
did that reveal a truth, though, that he's kind of worried about that?
I don't think he has any. I really don't know if there's any idea. I mean, I think this is a wait and see moment. Obviously, there was Kevin Hassett today said that we'll probably have something announced by the end of the day in regards to tariffs. We're supposed to have India, Japan, and South Korea within the next couple weeks. So we'll see what happens. But just on the side note of that, Trump's strategy is to talk and put so many things out that you can't even concentrate on one. And I mean, I'm actually surprised that I haven't. We could do a whole show just on the Christmas toys.
Indeed.
Normally.
Yes.
If that was Biden, right? Or someone that didn't go out in front of the
Jimmy
press
Carter's
as
rolling
much.
over in his grave right now. Like if Jimmy Carter, this is the version of put on a sweater
because turn the heat down.
This is the exact same thing, and I guarantee that will be part of lots of Democratic ads over the next several months and in the next cycle. I think what's missing in all of this, though, is just the broader uncertainty in the market and the broader concern from CEOs who are increasingly speaking out because it is hitting their bottom line. I mean, those empty store shelves mean that Walmart or Amazon or other companies aren't selling the things that they would otherwise be selling, that dents profits. And so I suspect over the next few months, you'll see more CEOs and executives speak out about this is the damage that this is causing to our bottom line, to the economy, to our ability to hire more workers. And they'll also stress, though I think if they're smart, the investments that they're still making across the U.S. where they can to help placate the White House.
Well, will the president, though, if we do see corporate profits getting squeezed, if we start to see economic impact, if kids can't get the toys they want for Christmas, just say this is still a Joe Biden problem? Because that is what he suggested yesterday. This is not his economy or his stock market yet.
But that's just a bunch of baloney. I mean, there's anybody can assess. He's president. The tariffs are all his fault. He put them in place. That's just a bunch of nonsense. And I think that most people can read right through it. He's president. The buck stops with him, theoretically, and on the tariff stuff, it definitely does.
Would you be advising blame the predecessor?
No,
here?
I don't think. Everyone does this the first quarter, first half of the year. You can't do it no matter what party you're in. I mean, you're the one that's in charge now, whether it's tariffs or anything else. You can't blame the person that was before you, because it doesn't matter. They're not in office anymore.
And the public's already blaming him. His polling on the economy has tanked because of this.
But I do want to say that one thing that this does is this puts tremendous pressure on Congress to get the tax cuts permanent, and I think that the president realizes that of the tariffs, especially if we don't have major trade deals, and we have to get this done in regards to Republicans in the House and Senate. So I think he's going to be putting a lot of time and effort. He has no ability to let this fail.
Well, the gears are turning on Capitol Hill. We'll have more on that a little later on this hour. This is a great panel. Thank you both. Ashley Davis, Adam Hodge, covering the news of the day with Michael Waltz, now apparently out as the president's national security advisor. Bloomberg News is now reporting that as we wait for an official word from the White House as well on a potential trade deal. Kevin Hassett saying that could come today as well. We'll have a lot more ahead right here on Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We are live in Washington. We're at the White House just moments ago. President Trump wrapped up an event marking the National Day of Prayer, in which he welcomed a number of high-profile individuals to the White House Rose Garden, including the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who got a special shout-out from the president. Trump saying that he's done a great job and is working very hard on a great, big, beautiful bill. speaking to the budget reconciliation process, which is hot underway on Capitol Hill. And the president actually also noted a meeting that had just taken place with some key figures in that process, including the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, the one that will be charged in figuring out the Medicaid question when it comes to how much to cut to offset the massive tax cuts Republicans are looking for. To hear the president say it, Joe, the final details on the tax bill are coming together. We just don't know exactly what those details look like yet.
Well, no, we don't. And this could be a long and drawn out process. It is important, though, that markups have begun. So we're actually getting to some real work that's taking place in the House, remembering that the whole point of reconciliation is to kind of get around the filibuster and maybe the opposing party. So we have an important conversation and an opportunity to spend some time with a high-ranking official in that party. Suzan DelBene, the Congresswoman from Washington's 1st District, also chair of the DCCC, tasked with getting Democrats elected and retaking the majority in the midterms. It's great to have you back with us, Congresswoman, as we consider the process that's underway right now and the point that we've already established here. Reconciliation is not exactly supposed to be a bipartisan affair, but will Democrats have any seat at the table to try to control the language that goes into this legislation that's currently being written?
Well, we haven't seen the language. So to your point, I think that the language is going to come out at the last minute and go straight into committees to be marked up. So this is anything but a bipartisan process, which is really unfortunate because we should hear from folks all across, representing districts across the country, and debate issues so we come up with the strongest policy for the American people. But that's not what this is about. This is about continuing to move forward Donald Trump's agenda. It's not about getting feedback from constituents or stakeholders. It's about doing what Donald Trump is telling Republicans to do. So I think we're going to see some kind of really damaging legislation come out. And you talked about Medicaid, devastating cuts to Medicaid that will hurt families all across the country.
Well, and when we consider the committee that you sit on specifically, Congresswoman, the Ways and Means Committee, have you heard anything from the chair, Jason Smith, about what he is intending exactly to mark up or when that markup will be happening?
No, in fact, we're kind of waiting to hear when the markup is going to happen. He has indicated that he might know when it's going to happen, but hasn't bothered to tell folks yet. I think they're going to try to jam things through very quickly, release a bill right before we meet in committee, kind of push that through and not really have really engage in debate. We're going to try to continue to highlight what we're hearing across the country, that folks want a tax code that's fair, that supports families across the country, that we are making investments in our kids, in workers, instead of giving tax breaks to the wealthiest and to large corporations. Unfortunately, that seems to be their focus. And we'll see when they roll it out, but I think that's what we all expect to see.
Well, Congresswoman, Democrats may have a big role to play here in potentially avoiding a default. We're going to get a next date in the next bit of time here when we have a better sense of when we're actually going to hit the debt ceiling. And if that matter has to be handled outside of reconciliation, then Speaker Johnson's going to have to work with people like you. What will Democrats look for in exchange for votes on raising the debt ceiling?
Well, I think we are going to continue to push for the things that we are important, standing up for programs that help our communities. We've seen this administration with rubber stamping from House Republicans strip programs that people rely on, dismantle Social Security, these cuts to Medicaid, ripping apart our institutions, firing people in the federal government with no plan, no rationale, and raising prices. The tariffs that are raising prices on families across the country and damaging our economy. The number one issue that Republicans said that they would handle for families in this last election was to lower costs. And President Trump said he would do it on day one. Broken promise after broken promise. We're seeing great damage to the economy that hurts families across the country. So we're going to continue to stand up for policies to help families and to fight against just the damage that this administration continues to put on due to the American people. And again,
I just want to follow up on the Medicaid issue, though, Congresswoman, because
Yeah.
The president has said, though, that there would be no Medicaid cuts. The speakers said that as well, right? Are you hearing from Chip Roy or other members who are demanding it?
If you look at the budget that Republicans passed in the House and in the Senate, requires massive cuts to Medicaid. That's what they voted on. That's what's on the table. And now we'll see what they put forward in this reconciliation bill. But their budget already called for massive cuts to Medicaid.
If we could return, Congresswoman, to what you were just saying about the economic damage that could be done here, the greater the degree of that economic damage, does that mean the wider the map for you as you try to retake the majority next year?
Well, when you listen to people across the country, you hear outrage from people across the country, and they're scared. They're scared because they see the damaging policies that this administration has put forward, attacks on programs they rely on, costs going up. And folks want people who are going to fight for them, not folks who are blindly loyal to Donald Trump. So absolutely, we have opportunities across the country. We put out our map, the districts in play, where we think we have opportunities to flip districts. It's all over the country. And as we've seen in special elections, Republicans are losing ground. And I think we still have opportunities to continue to expand our map as we look forward, because people want to see a change. They want a Congress that's going to do its job and stand up for the American people. We are a co-equal branch of government. We are not a rubber stamp for the Trump administration.
So politically speaking, then, as chair of the DCCC, are Trump tariffs the best thing that happened to Democrats?
Well, Trump tariffs are devastating for families. We're
politically
seeing costs
speaking
go up, but this is about what is right for the American people, and we're going to hold them accountable. We're going to hold them accountable for the damage that they're doing. People are outraged and they're scared. If Republicans actually held town halls in their districts and listened to their constituents, that's what they'd be hearing, and that's what we stand for. And we're going to hold them accountable and make sure that they have representatives who are going to stand up for them.
Well, and when we consider the makeup of those representatives, Congresswoman, how many seats realistically do you think you could pick up in 2026? What would you count as a landslide midterm election?
You know, we need 3 more seats to take back the majority. Our priority is making sure we have the gavels, that Hakeem Jeffries is Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, and we're going to fight for every seat so we have a strong majority across the country. Our districts in play, the maps where we're on offense, we have 35 districts across the country where we feel like we have opportunities, and we will continue to update that as Republicans continue to do damage. That's our focus. But job one is to make sure we have the gavels so there's a check on this president and there's a part of the federal government that is standing up for the American people.
You mentioned the town halls, Congresswoman, and indeed Republicans are holding fewer of them. Are you encouraging your members to hold more as we approach Memorial Day?
Well, the DCCC has been working with the DNC, with local and state officials in districts across the country to have town halls so people's stories can be heard. People want to talk about the challenges they faced when there have been cuts to the Veterans Administration. They struggle to access their veterans benefits, the struggles that they face because of tariffs and rising costs, the impact that the cuts that this administration have had on their communities. It's so important that we hear the stories and people understand what's happening on the ground. Republicans may not want to hear that, but we are hearing it everywhere, and we want to make sure people have an opportunity to be heard.
Well, when we consider Republicans potentially criticizing Republican members, there's also some criticism going around inside the Democratic Party right now. Congresswoman David Hogg, who serves as one of the vice chairs of the DNC, of course, a survivor of the Parkland school shooting, announced he's whipping $25 million into play to unseat incumbent Democrats. Have you spoken to him about that?
You know, I think Democrats are united in making sure we take back the House. That is job one. That is our focus. That is what we are working on across the country. And again, our number one priority has to be making sure that we have a check on this president and that we have folks who are going to stand up for the American people. So we are united in doing that and are going to continue to move forward to make sure that we have the gavels as we head into the next Congress.
I want to ask you about the president's attack on Act Blue, a major online donation platform for Democrats. The president planning to sign a presidential memorandum here to crack down on foreign contributions in American elections. What do we need to know about this?
I think it's unfortunate, not surprising to see Republicans and the president continue to attack elections across the country to try to prevent voters from having access to the ballot, from trying to prevent people from being able to be involved in campaigns. We absolutely need to make sure that we're standing up for voting rights across the country. And we're going to continue to see baseless attacks from this president on vote by mail, on democratic institutions. We need to continue to make sure we stand up to that and make sure that people across the country have access to the ballot because their voices need to be heard.
All right, the chair of the DCCC, Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, Democrat representing Washington's 1st District. Thank you so much for joining us here on Balance of Power. And we still have more ahead as we turn back to Mike Waltz out as National Security Advisor, at least unofficially. We'll have more on that on Bloomberg TV and radio. And of course, one of those market moves today is inclusive of NVIDIA, the stock up about 4% after we saw NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang actually in Washington yesterday. He got up early in the day with our colleague Anne-Marie Hordern on Capitol Hill and then made his way over to the White House for the president's big Investing in America event, marking, of course, 100 days in office and the trillions of dollars in investments he says are coming to the U.S. Part of that, of course, are commitments NVIDIA is making, though some of that money already had been announced. But Jensen Huang actually went up to the podium.
Sure did.
And talked about the importance of investing not just in manufacturing, but in technology specifically, as NVIDIA, of course, is trying to ingratiate itself with the White House. That is also looking at policy that impacts NVIDIA's ability to sell chips in certain places.
Now we're getting onto something here. If you can see him there, that was from yesterday in the Cross Hall at the White House. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, he did not have the leather jacket. He did have a suit and tie. And remarkable, I want to get into this with Mike Shepard, Kailey. This was less than 24 hours ago, and all of a sudden there's a headline on the terminal. U.S. weighs easing NVIDIA chip curbs on UAE as Trump plans visit. We've been talking about turning the screws in a more strict way. We actually increasing export controls. So maybe we're going in the other direction now that these two men got to spend some time together. Mike Shepard with us in Washington right now. Is it as simple as that? You pay a visit to the White House, spend some time with the boss, and now Mike's writing a good story about you.
Well, that's certainly what Donald Trump would like the world to think, that simply paying a visit and paying homage and maybe delivering some of the things that he wants to hear, including, Kailey, as you mentioned, investments. NVIDIA was among the companies that was singled out yesterday during this White House event titled Investing in America. And NVIDIA has committed to spending up to $500 billion on producing AI infrastructure here in the U.S. Not just the chips themselves, but the servers, the whole package, the whole enchilada that goes with one of their assemblies. And that's a lot of money, and it is something they are trying to fulfill here together with Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., which actually produces and builds the things that they design. But in return, what do they get out of it? They are concerned at the same time about what they're seeing potentially happening abroad. New rules that the Biden administration published right before their term ended, this is like a week before Donald Trump took office, would set different levels of access for countries when it comes to AI chips, especially those made by NVIDIA. And that means that for NVIDIA, the stakes of this rule and how it ultimately gets implemented are really, really high. They depend on China, of course, as a significant market. It is increasingly closed off by U.S. export controls. But their concern is that other countries, a number of other countries, including the UAE and others, Israel as well, may also face higher restrictions, limits on how many of these sophisticated chips they can buy.
Well, and it is the UAE that Bloomberg has some new reporting on today ahead of the president's trip there in just a couple of weeks. He's looking at restrictions on chips we sell to the UAE specifically. We sell them fighter jets, Mike. Why can't they have the chips, right?
Well, and that was one of the questions that our reporting turned up. The president is having asked, if we can sell them the F-35, why can't we sell them unlimited quantities of these AI chips? And really the answer is the concern, of course, over China, and that there could be some leakage of technology ultimately to China. As a way of addressing that, G42, which is one of the big investment vehicles in the Emirate, they had cut off ties and worked with Huawei Technologies, which is one of the perennial targets here in Washington. And that was seen as maybe a step in the right direction, but maybe not enough just yet. The Biden administration, to be fair, had been in discussions with the Emiratis about possibly dialing back future chip restrictions, but those talks ultimately ended after President Donald Trump won the election in November, and now they're having to kind of pick up where they left off. But they are getting a little bit of help here from Jensen Huang, who wants to be sure that NVIDIA's chips somehow don't lose key markets and access to markets. And what he's arguing is that if you cut us off, countries may be forced to turn to China as a source of almost as sophisticated chips as ours.
All right, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, thank you so much. Joining us with Bloomberg's exclusive breaking reporting from earlier today. Thank you so much. Of course, we've gotten a lot of that lately. We also were dealing with breaking news on the late edition of Balance of Power last night as Bloomberg reported that the U.S. and Ukraine had at long last actually signed the natural resources deal that the U.S., of course, has long argued means that it has a vested interest in Ukraine and its infrastructure, in its mining capacities, and therefore would act as a kind of security guarantee. And when that news broke, we actually got real-time reaction from Michael Allen, former national security advisor to President George W. Bush, now with Beacon Global Strategies. And this is what he told us.
In order for a peace to become everlasting, I think the Ukrainians have to be able to deter the Russians, and they're never going to be able to deter the Russians unless they have enough of a treasury to support enough of a fighting force in order for Russia and for Vladimir Putin to say in the future, you know what, this is too risky for me to try again. And so if they feel like they can purchase military assistance on their own and even reimburse the United States for things that we can uniquely supply, I think it's good for peace ultimately.
We want to get more reaction now from Kailey Grieco. She's senior fellow at the Stimson Center's Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy program and is here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kailey, welcome back to Balance of Power. Now that this deal is signed, what real security guarantee do you think it does provide Ukraine? Is simply having a U.S. vested interest, potentially U.S. personnel on Ukrainian soil, enough of an actual deterrent to a Russian aggressor?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm afraid that I'm not going to be giving you good news about security guarantees. I don't think this deal offers anything in the way of something that could be construed as a security guarantee. This is a largely symbolic deal. Even if there are eventually U.S. personnel meaning really civilians, right, on the ground exploring mining, it's really not a security guarantee. I just don't see this as actually providing anything credible in the way that it ties American hands moving forward.
The White House has framed this as kind of an indirect security guarantee, Kailey, right? As you suggest, U.S. contractors at some point will be teaming in Ukraine. How dare Russia attack Ukraine with Americans on the ground? I guess my question, though, is how long it would take for these contractors to actually dig in. It could take many, many years to get working mines and processing in place.
Yes, I mean, I think the first question is, are there U.S. companies that are interested in doing this, given the security situation? I mean, that's the first thing, right? And the second is, from a business perspective, do they see this as a potentially profitable enterprise? Because there are real questions about exactly what is there in terms of minerals, because these are based on a lot of Soviet, surveys. And also, is it going to be worth the investment, right? It'll take a lot of startup costs to do this. So, I think that's one set of questions, right, about whether we're going to see this actually happening. But assuming it does, and there are contractors on the ground, I'll just say that, we had hundreds of thousands of U.S. military forces in West Germany during the Cold War. And there were always questions about whether that would be sufficient to draw us directly in to a military engagement with the Soviet Union. So I'm very doubtful that U.S. Civilians being there, to essentially try to get profits, economic opportunity, that would be a death of, tens or even hundreds or even thousands might be enough to draw us into a military conflict. I just don't see that happening.
Okay, so your skepticism around this being something that can provide a long-term durable peace is duly noted, Kelly. But do you think in the short term it can help precipitate a peace deal of some kind between the U.S. and Russia? Does this still put some incremental pressure on the Kremlin?
Yeah, so I think this deal does two things. As I said, I think it's symbolic, but it does two things on a symbolic level that are useful. One, it gave Donald Trump a sense that he was getting something back from the Ukrainians, and that seemed to be very important to him. And I think the other thing it did is it actually did signal some level of repair in the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship from what we saw, in that dramatic White House blow up. And so I think the fact that, it seems like the United States and Ukraine have restored their working relationship is really important as a signal. And there is a couple lines in the agreement itself, the text that the Ukrainians released, that I think is a signal to Russia. One being that it refers to Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which I think is quite significant. And so we see some hardening language that the American side is willing to use in talking about the Russians, which I think is a signal that we're going to see more pressure on Putin to actually negotiate in a serious way.
Kelly Grieco, I want to ask you about what's going on in the Red Sea, because with so much news, it's not something that's been on the front page lately. The fact is the U.S. forces continue to attack Houthi rebels in Yemen, and the UK is now participating in joint operations. This is, of course, the same attack that was referred to in the Signalgate scandal that has apparently helped to contribute to the end of Mike Waltz's career as national security advisor at the White House. There was a report just a couple of days ago that the USS Harry Truman had to take such evasive measures after being shot at by Houthi rebels that an FA-18 fighter jet actually fell out of the boat while it was being towed into the ocean, $67 million into the drink. What are we not hearing about that's taking place in the Red Sea right now? How active are our forces? And what kind of threat are they under when we hear about missiles being fired at aircraft carriers?
Yeah, so, this morning I was reading a story that said we've now hit 1,000 targets, which is extraordinary to me, particularly because earlier this week I read another report saying it was 800. So, in a span of a few days, it sounds like we've hit another 200 targets. What we're seeing is a lot of use of force, a lot of strikes are being conducted, but it's actually not generating an operational strategic effect in terms of reducing the Houthi threat to the Red Sea. And of course, this is coming at enormous costs, and not just in terms of those missile strikes, but also these kinds of incidents, one F-18 being shot down accidentally by a carrier, and another, this case where, the aircraft went off the side, into the Red Sea itself. We call those soft kills in the military field, in the sense that, it wasn't directly shot down by the Houthis, but the Houthis get, credit in a sense for the loss of 2 F-18s because they wouldn't have been lost other than the fact they were participating in these operations. So this is enormously expensive for us, and it's not achieving an operational strategic effect. I can't tell you why we're still doing this other than that it seems that we want to be doing something about the problem and projecting some level of strength. But if the goal is to, preserve the Red Sea and traffic in the Red Sea, that's clearly not being achieved.
Wow. Kelly, it's good to have you back. Kelly Grieco, Senior Fellow at the Stimson Center's Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy Program. Good to have you with us right here on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg. We're still in waiting mode. We could have news on trade later today. And when I get back here with Kailey a little bit later on today, we might be talking about that, Kailey. Kevin Hassett said there would be news on tariffs at some point before the end of the day. Japan, India, what do we think?
I don't know. Hasn't gotten more specific than that, but hopefully we'll get some news. And we're also looking, of course, for official confirmation from the White House, from President Trump himself, that he intends to oust his national security advisor, Mike Waltz. So we have much to get to later on. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Eastern time. In the meantime, Bloomberg Business Week Daily is straight ahead right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.